Well, this is certainly a newsworthy edition of the Install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. I walked into the radio studio today at 9:57, and at 9:58, Stefon Diggs was the newest member of the Houston Texans, Greg. It has been crazy to see the amount of work that all four teams have done in this division. The AFC South is going to be a lot friskier than we're used to around here.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, you have young quarterbacks, and you have a lot of skill position players. I mean, the Texans now, I guess, because Tank Dell will be back from his injury, their top three receivers will be Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stefon Diggs. That's not a bad trio.
Not bad at all. And especially like Nico Collins, Greg, and I know he's a different kind of wide receiver and certainly physically different from a lot of the prototypical players that you see at the position nowadays, but he was playing like one of the best wide receivers in football before the injury. And Nico Collins, it's been a more of a late bloom, and he's always had promise, certainly, but he is as competent a starting,
Yes.
true outside wide receiver as any in football right now.
He's now sort of in some ways, well, he's not the best. I'm not going to say he's the best.
Sure.
He's prototypical as far as what we call the boundary X, that single receiver to the short side of the field that can win one-on-one, that can run multiple route concepts. They get a lot of man-to-man coverage. He can get vertical. He can run crossers. He can run away from coverage. And quite honestly, because Stefon Diggs, and I know people probably have a sense of Diggs as being big time, but Diggs has declined a little bit. Mm-hmm. He is not a number one anymore. In fact, he may be the number three receiver there. He's certainly not going to get the same target volume that he got in Buffalo, which of course had declined pretty significantly. And he'll be 31 during the course of this season. So he's getting a little older, but in the situation now in Houston, he doesn't have to be, the so-called number one. He's not going to be. And we saw what Tank Dell did last year. So they've got a really nice trio, and they've got Dell and Diggs, who are both movable chess pieces within the context of an offense.
So I guess where have we seen the most notable drop off in Diggs's game, Greg? Because 30 is typically the tipping point for wide receivers in particular. And it sounds like more of an attitude thing with Buffalo just kind of getting tired of the passive aggressiveness after a while. Maybe on top of where he's heading as a player.
We're certainly not in the building, but the fact is they had to eat a little cap money when they made this trade. So it appears, just as an outsider without knowing all the details, that they wanted to get him out of the building. And again, not being there, we don't know all. We just know what we hear and what we see on TV. That's all we know. But, I think that they feel that it's time to move on. Plus, Buffalo signed Curtis Samuel, who in some ways is Stefon Diggs and a younger, slightly more explosive version of Diggs right now in the way that he can align all over the formation, which Diggs had become. Diggs is not really a vertical dimension at this point. Never was a true vertical dimension, but could get deep. Now he's become, in many ways, kind of a short to intermediate receiver, which, quite frankly, fits Houston really well because Collins can be vertical. Dell, even though he's short, is vertical. So Diggs is in many ways kind of that savvy underneath receiver now within the context of their offense.
Now, this is a great draft if you need wide receiver help, and Buffalo certainly will need wide receiver help, because they do have Curtis Samuel, but Gabe Davis and Stefon Diggs now both out the door. What I guess is your biggest question about how Buffalo is going to move forward with this, Greg? Because it's obviously going to be a much different team than we're accustomed to seeing beyond Josh Allen.
Yeah. Buffalo is going to have Curtis Samuel. They really like Khalil Shakir, who's going to go into his third year, and he came on last year, and he was predominantly slot, but they'll move him around because he's not a small little guy. We'll see what they do with Dalton Kincaid, who, again, rookie last year, caught a lot of balls. I would expect his role to expand in terms of the kinds of routes. He may not catch 120 balls, and I think he caught 70 or so a year ago. So I don't know if the target share increases dramatically, but I think the way he'll be deployed within the context of an offense, particularly with Joe Brady now being there for a full season, he's there. But I think one thing that Joe Brady really has to work on in this league is getting guys open, scheming them open. You can't just rely on Josh Allen to make big time throws all the time. You've got to scheme guys open. And I'll be very anxious to see how they do that. But there's no question they need another wideout. It's very possible they could draft two. You don't want to leave Josh Allen hanging without wide receivers to throw the ball to.
No, especially with as competitive as the AFC is right now. I know they're trying to avoid as much slippage as humanly possible.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
To try and keep pace with not just Kansas City at this point, but Baltimore as they start to look.
And who knows about the AFC South? We're going to have a lot of fun this year, Buck. This is going to be a really interesting season. I mean, you've got all these young quarterbacks. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is the old man going into his fourth year.
Yeah.
You got Richardson and Levis and Stroud all going into their second year. I mean, it's really going to be an interesting division, a fun one to really watch as the season progresses.
I don't know that I've ever said that about the AFC South before a season, Greg, that it's going to be a fun season in the AFC South. That's not typically our experience around
here. But I think it's going to be, don't you think?
No, I absolutely agree. Because, I mean, like for me, just kind of, 1,000-foot view, the Titans and the Colts are a little bit of a science experiment because I have no idea what to do with Richardson at this point.
And you can say the same to some extent, no matter what we think of Richardson or what I think. And I have, obviously, based on tape, have a point of view. Same with Will Levis.
But sure.
They're still unknowns. You still just don't really know. So we'll see. I mean, you're right. It's it's April 3rd. It's not even April Fool's. We passed that. So we're not making any jokes here, but it's going to be very interesting, because the Titans have weapons now too. You could argue the Colts probably don't have great weapons, but they have a quarterback who is a weapon unto himself if, when healthy. And we now, we spoke about the Texans and what they have. The Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, still a solid player. They have explosive players as well. It's going to be a fascinating division. I'm curious when the schedule comes out, when the division games, how they decide to map all that out.
Yeah, no, it's that's all we can ask for is competitive football with a lot of fun players, and the AFC South seems to be flush with those as of late. So we'll see what kind of players continue to be added to these teams, of course, as we continue our draft coverage leading up to in 22 days from now, the first round of the NFL draft. And we know talking about a couple of these different teams, Greg, I mean, any team could use more good quality offensive linemen, in this draft class has quite a few, not just tackles, but interior guys who are really, really solid as prospects and have the ability to project as high-end prospects as well. Not getting into lists or anything like that, but I'd like to start with Jackson Powers Johnson, who I think our buddy Coach Mack described as a human forklift, the center out of Oregon, whose measurables are impressive, but the athleticism that he displays in that offense that they ran is as tantalizing as any of his physical attributes.
Yeah, I mean, he plays a strong man's game. I mean, that's what he really is. He has strong, powerful, heavy hands, and he moved people. He packed a short, quick, compact, yet really powerful punch. It very often changed the path of pass rushers, and he was able to maintain his balance and a strong base. I think that's his game. He's not a bad athlete, Buck, but he's not the best athlete you'll see at the center position. I'll be really curious to see, where he gets drafted. You never know with centers, but he's got strength, he's got power. He certainly has more than functional athletic movement, and there's a high level of competitive toughness. I mean, you want a guy on your offensive line who plays, with an attitude, who's nasty, who finishes, who sets a tone. That's what this guy does. I mean, he's that kind of player. He finishes with an edge. There's a swagger to him. That's what you want with your offensive line.
Yeah, it's fun to watch some of the games against Utah or Washington. Just a good year of Pac-12 football. Unfortunate that the Pac-12 is being dismantled the way that it is. But some of the clips, you talk about that finish, that nastiness, him standing over guys after he finishes a block or just continuing to play through the whistle and stuff like that. He is going to be an interesting player. It seems right now like he's going to be a first-round pick at the position. And is it just center that you look at him and see, Greg, or is there some positional versatility to him?
I mean, theoretically, based on his measurables, you could see him as a guard. You know, some teams may see that. You know, he's over 6'3", he's 328. I think you could see him as a guard. You know, usually inside arm length is not considered as important as it is for tackles. He does not have long arms. But I don't think that would be viewed as, oh, we can't draft him because of that. I think he could play guard. You know, he's a nasty guy. I mean, that's what you want. I mean, he's a tone setter for an offense. And I think that all O-line coaches love that kind of player.
Absolutely. As we talk about positional versatility, I think Graham Barton is a player that, you know, playing primarily tackle at Duke and a local guy around here, it seems like he's going to project more as a guard center type and interior hybrid type of player. What stands out on the tape when you watch Graham Barton?
Yeah, I don't believe he'll play tackle in the National Football League. But I think that he could be, you know, an efficient guard or center. You know, I think that he's a guy that has good strength, you know, as a down blocker. You know, he played with leverage. He's got some core strength. You know, I think that he was, you know, again, I've only seen him play tackle. So, you know, I think he did a pretty good job in pass pro. He handled speed to power well, which, you know, of course, if you're playing inside, you've got to be able to handle power. You know, you want to be able to stay sort of upright within that cylinder. You know, you want to be able to stand straight. You don't want to, you know, have your body bending, you know, at the sideways or forward, obviously, but certainly even sideways. And he was able to do that. You know, I learned a lot about O-line play last year when I went to the O-line masterminds in Texas. And so I used a lot of that when I watched him. He was really efficient as a run blocker with his first and second step. You want your second step to generate leverage and power, and he did a really good job with that. My guess is he'll be a really solid guard or center, you know, maybe not the best in the league, but he'll be one of those guys you can really count on.
Yeah, at the combine, arm length, not overwhelming strength as you mentioned, but 6'5", 313 is what he weighed in and measured at. Seemingly a player that is going to be efficient at the next level. We'll see what kind of player he turns into as a pro. So we talked about positional versatility, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on Jordan Morgan here, Greg, because exclusively a left tackle as a college player at Arizona. You know, it seems to be, depending on who you ask, people think that he could stay there in the NFL. Maybe some think that he might be better on the inside. But I remember watching him at the Senior Bowl and just seeing some of the hand placement or hand, I guess, technique inefficiencies that he got exposed on in some of the one-on-one reps, which are, of course, one of the more valuable parts of the Senior Bowl, or of the Senior Bowl. And I wonder what you made of him when you watch him.
Well, and by the way, there will be coaches who will not even see him as a tackle for one simple reason: his arm length is less than 33 inches, and that will be seen by some and many perhaps as a problem. So he may be a guard right off the bat. He may not even be viewed as a tackle prospect by the large majority of coaches in the National Football League. You know, and I think that will be an issue. I mean, he does have light feet. He does have fluid athletic movement. But you made an interesting point that got a little bit exposed. And, you know, one of the things that I see with a lot of college tackles, and it was absolutely true with Jordan Morgan, and I wonder if they're coached this way, if it's easily fixable. But, you know, when you're using your hands and striking, when you pass protect, so many college tackles, and as I said, Morgan is one of them, they get wide and late. So in other words, instead of coming inside and striking inside, you know, into the body, so many of these college tackles come outside and they're late with their hands, and that allows the pass rusher to get into their chest. And that's exactly what you don't want to have happen. So, you know, he was like that. And I'm sure I didn't see the tape from the Senior Bowl, but I imagine that was one of the things that did stand out. And it certainly stands out on tape.
Yeah, it is a curious question, and the only way that we would know is to be able to talk to a variety of different offensive line coaches across
Right.
college football. But it similarly to the way that we've talked about Alt, right? Doesn't mean that he can't be coached. Doesn't mean that he can't
Right.
pick up these things at the next level or improve as he continues his progression as a pro. It would be interesting to know specifically how they're being coached at a variety of different universities on this stuff, because it's evident to guys like you and to people who are tasked with offensive line evaluation that it's not the most efficient way to get into their
No, you never want to be
blocks.
wide, and wide and late with your hands, because if you're wide, people get into your chest, and that's a problem. But but all these guys, when they get to the league and the first time they face in a real game, a Myles Garrett, a Nick Bosa, a TJ Watt, and I'm missing some, great pass rushers. But those guys, it's just going to be different than what they faced in college. And they're just going to have to kind of figure out, okay, how do I deal with that? Because I can't deal with it exactly the same way I dealt with the pass rushers in college.
So before I ask you for a prospect that you've been watching that may not be on everybody's radar, because we talked about a fair amount of players that are mainstream thus far, I want to remind people that the tickets are selling way too fast. I mean, we're very happy that they're selling fast, but they're selling way too fast for you to delay getting your ticket to the live show on May the 3rd. Greg, as we tape this podcast, we are 1 month away from your return to Nashville, and for a great show with audience participation of us breaking down all the moves that they've made in free agency this offseason and a whole new draft class that we will have, 6 days after they complete it?
That is correct. Let's see. We're doing it on Friday night, May 3rd.
Friday night, May the 3rd.
The draft ends Saturday. So Friday night, May the 3rd. Yes.
Six days after the draft wraps up, we've got some special things planned. It's all going to be to the benefit of Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which we're very excited to help raise funds for this year, and always excited to get involved with you guys with this live show that Greg and I look forward to so much doing. So we'll see you then. Make sure you get your tickets at 1045thezone.com. Greg, let's wrap up with a prospect that you've been watching that you feel the audience needs to know about.
There's an offensive lineman. We're staying on the offensive line here. So Brandon Coleman from TCU, probably not a household name. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a guy that absolutely has the versatility to transition at either offensive tackle or left guard, depending on team and scheme. I mean, he's played both at TCU. He's 6'4.5", 313, has really long arms, had very good testing measurables for somebody 313. He's got length, he's got strength, he's got a strong grip. He played predominantly left tackle at TCU, and I thought he did a really good job. But he's had I think 11 starts in college at left guard as well. So here's a guy that, when you talk about versatility with experience, that's the thing, not just projecting and saying, well, I think he can do that based on his traits or other things. We've seen him do it, so he's a guy. And again, you know me, Buck, I don't sit here and say, well, I expect him to go in this round or that round, but I think offensive line coaches are going to like this kid. And, again, the way a draft plays out, you and I have no idea how that is. But he's going to be a really interesting prospect in my opinion.
Well, he's one of these, I don't want to call him a late bloomer because he's had a fair amount of college experience, but he's late to football in terms of basketball was one of his primary focuses too. Just reading up on him a little bit in my draft prep, Greg, and I wonder how much, if at all, when you talk to offensive line coaches or just coaches in general across the league, do they bring up cross training among different sports? Because the footwork is so obvious with these guys, the athleticism is so obvious with these guys, with the ones who have the basketball background, and I just don't know if it's too hyper focused right out the gates to be focused on one sport coming out of high school and grade school and stuff like that.
Well, look, to talk about news, think about the fact that the North Carolina State kid Burns, as we go into the Final Four, they were talking about him that he should, start working out at the left tackle position because, he's got such good feet, and that somebody would sign him as a free agent just to try to teach him how to play left tackle. You've probably seen all that.
I sure have.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no question that, not only cross-training in sports, but cross-training positionally on the O-line is something a lot of coaches believe in, because they think that all the traits you can theoretically master, obviously you're not mastering every single trait, but the more traits that you feel comfortable with and that you can deploy depending on whatever it is, where you're playing, who you're playing against, the better you're going to be. So there's a definite sense of cross-training for a lot of coaches.
Absolutely. Well, when we come back next, we'll continue our draft coverage. I'm sure there'll be more news by the time you and I get together next Wednesday, and the offseason is flying by, my friend. We are, as we said, 22 days away from the NFL draft.
And 1 month away from the Hutton Hotel, the analog room. It's 1 month from today.
From the main event, we are fired up. We can't wait to have you guys in the house. 1045thezone.com to get your tickets. Greg, my friend, a pleasure as always. Thank you for spending some time.
Thanks, Buck.